Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. I am back once again with a new live stream work session. I hope you're all having a good weekend. I'm going to be, for those who are new to the stream, I'm going to be working on drawing pages from my ongoing gothic horror webcomic titled Sable, a Ghost Story. I do all of my work the old-fashioned way by pen and ink, so let's get started. I always like to think of these as like a good like background thing. Like, hopefully you've all got projects you're doing or just enjoying your weekend, and you can sort of set a nice chill thing on in the background. All right, let's see. These are my weapons of choice this week. This is what I usually use to ink. I've got this lovely ergonomic wood-handled dip pen. This is a G-nib dip pen. I don't know if you can see that. I don't have autofocus on here, so there we go. That's a little bit better. This is a nib that is used a lot by like manga artists. It's got a nice flex to it. When you apply a little bit of pressure, these like the tips of it separate. You can see that a little bit, which gives it a nice like thick to thin line. This one's a school nib. It's a little more controlled for its a little more like specific stuff. And then this one is a fountain pen. This one will not get dipped in an inkwell. It's got the ink inside of it already. This is a Noodler's Ahab Flex pen. We're going to start with this one. So we've got, this one's good for like little detail things. And we're going to start at the top here with Teddy. How's everyone doing? If this is your first time here, feel free to pop any questions or comments you have in the chat. I'll be checking it throughout. I'll try and answer any questions you guys have. When I'm inking a page, I typically like to start with the focal point of whatever the panel or illustration is. That's where the audience's eye is going to go. It's where I need to direct narrative focus. And I like to start with it because then if I mess up, then I can start over without having wasted too much time. It's the bit that needs to be gotten right. Actually, this Teddy, you can see from the comparison on my hand that this is quite a small drawing of Teddy. So I am going to bust out this little magnifying glass that I have, which helps prevent me having to like crouch really close to my drawing board and ruin my spine. I can kind of see a bit better. Plus, it makes me feel like I'm solving art crimes. I'm going real slow here on his face because it is very small, but because it's, you know, things like faces and hands are things that we just naturally devote a lot of attention to as humans. It's just how we're used to interacting with the world around us and with other people. And so faces and hands are always the thing you kind of need to be the most careful and particular about. And then I feel like you can get a little more loose with things like clothing and whatever. So this particular page that I'm drawing is that's a little later in chapter 2 of the webcomic. Chapter 1 is currently posting publicly on sablecomic.com. Chapter 2 is currently posting on Patreon. So I suppose this is a minor spoiler, but I try on these live streams to pick fairly spoiler-free images. I'm going to try to avoid doing any of these live streams with like anything that's like a big plot reveal, you know? I'm just going to use this magnifying glass to get his other hand here, and then I can just eyeball the rest of it. For those of you who are fountain pen enthusiasts, I've got this pen filled with a platinum carbon ink, which is one of the very few fountain pen inks that is water resistant once dry. When you're working with a pen like this, a fountain pen, a lot of them are not water resistant because it can clog up the pen really easily. I'm not sure what makes platinum carbon so special that they're able to do it. This is also a screw top fountain pen, so it seals when it's closed, so it's a little less likely to dry out. But it's good for little detail things like this. The reason it's important that it dries waterproof is because I watercolor paint over these to color the pages. Alright. So I'm going to focus on mostly just getting the overall line work down. And then once the whole page has been lined in, I'll go back and do like hatching and shading and things. There's a lot of open space in this top panel, as you can see, that I'm just sort of filling with like vague architectural details, and that's because in the final comic, there will be a lot of dialogue up in here. So this is mostly a very talky page. So I don't want to get too caught up in a lot of the details around this because most of it's going to be covered by speech bubbles. But I like to draw in the whole page anyway, just so I have a little bit of flexibility in where I can move around the text. I used to not like doing background stuff like this very much. I think it's very common, especially for younger artists or more inexperienced artists, to prefer working in the characters in the background. I do still prefer to draw the characters, but I eventually was able to sort of start thinking of the background as a character with its own particular texture and detail and personality to convey, and that sort of helped me become more interested in drawing these backgrounds. There's a certain shape language to the haunted house, which is called Wit's End is the name of the house. And it's been kind of fun to sort of figure out those little architectural details. One Step at a Time asks, hi, do you use hot press watercolor paper for the comics? Yes, I do. Well spotted. For those who are less familiar with how watercolor works, watercolor paper, which is thicker and designed to absorb the water of watercolor a bit better than normal paper, which kind of just falls apart when you paint over it. Watercolor paper is a bit stiffer, and it comes in two kinds. There's hot press and cold press, and that just kind of refers to a process that's done to them to treat them when the paper is being made. So cold press is a little more rough and bumpy. If you're just doing watercolor, it's really good because it brings out that like nice organic watercolory texture. Hot press is much smoother, and it's good for what I'm doing, which is the line work and drawing. Cold press can be a little too bumpy to handle a pen, and so I use a hot press watercolor paper. If people are brand nerds, this is just the Blick store brand watercolor block. That's what I've used for almost all of my books. I find it's a pretty decent watercolor paper. You know, it's sort of pricey as far as paper goes, but as far as like good watercolor paper, it's a little bit more of a reasonable price point than some of the others. So it's been a good go-to for me for a number of years now. We won't get to the painting on the stream today, but there are past live streams where I've watercolor painted, and I'll be doing them for future streams as well. If you'd like to see past live streams, videos on demand for all of them are available for patrons in the Wolf and Wraith tiers, along with quite a few pages of the webcomic at this point. All right. I'm just trying to get in the overall structure of the room here, and then I can fill in some of the details. Oops. The Artistic Nomad says, your style is my art style, and it's a big inspiration for mine. Thank you so much. I always like talking about like inspiration and influences with different artists. It's just interesting to sort of hear about everyone's like artistic lineage, you know, sort of family history of inspiration. My really big touchstones for my style are a lot of book illustrators from the sort of 1910s to 1940s. So fairy tale illustrators like Arthur Rackham or Edmund Dulac or John Bower are all big inspirations. I just realized I goofed something. That's okay. I'm very inspired by other book illustrators like E.H. Shepard, who illustrated the Winnie the Pooh books and The Wind in the Willows, which is another big inspiration for the overall aesthetic of this book. I love that like loose pen and ink work that he does. It's so lively. And then in terms of like comics themselves, if you're reading the webcomic, you can probably see quite a bit of Mike Mignola influence. He did the Hellboy comics. I think he does an incredible job of creating just an amazing heavy atmosphere, especially for like horror work. I read a lot of Franco-Belgian comics. A few people online have noted that there's sort of like a vague Tintin aesthetic to this comic, which I think is probably a fair comparison. I never really read a bunch of the Tintin books, but they certainly do have an appealing sensibility, and I like that sort of European look. I also love, in terms of like horror comics, I love the work of Emily Carroll. I wouldn't say that there's like a lot of direct influence in the style of how I work on Emily Carroll, but if you like comics, and especially horror comics, Emily Carroll is one of the best to do it. She also has a lot of amazing free-to-read webcomics on her website, which I highly recommend. My inspirations are Louis the Third, Samurai Jack, Kill You Up, and Gravity Falls. Very good inspirations. Yeah, I mean, like, and that's just being an artist, right? Is just sometimes it's like a piece of work will be a big inspiration to you, but not even necessarily influence your style. It's just something that motivates you to do better and better work because of how amazing you found a certain piece. I think that's the best, is when you find something that like doesn't even necessarily jive with how you work. It just makes you want to work on your own work. Alright. I'm just drawing in these little frames here just to fill out the space with some visual interest. Like I said, most of this panel is going to be covered with speech bubbles in the final version of the page. So I don't want to get too caught up in crazy details, because most of them are not even going to be visible. But I like to be able to fill in a bunch of the space just so I can move the bubbles around and not have a bunch of like blank between them. I'm trying to preserve that kind of loose line work style, like the E.H. Shepard style of drawing, like I mentioned. So sometimes I'll use a ruler to do the guidelines for these like rigid, perspective-heavy environments when I'm doing the pencils. But I almost never do it for the inks, because I kind of want it to have that scratchy, wobbly quality that the rest of the drawing has, so it doesn't look too rigid. It kind of preserves that same hand-drawn organic feel as the rest of the drawing. And I think that's also kind of at least nods to the, sort of a stylized nod to the way that actual houses and environments work. Unless it's like an extremely new build, things sag and warp and tilt over time. And this is like a classic haunted house, so it goes double for that. Asks, let's see. Hello, I assume you will add the bubbles on PC, right? Yes, that's correct. I tend to do the speech bubbles and lettering digitally. It's one of the very few parts of the process that is digital. That's because very early on in my career, I tried to do everything by hand and old school, and so that included hand lettering the speech bubbles. And there are some amazing artists out there that do it and are very good at it, and I admire greatly. I was immediately told by my editor that I should never do it again because my handwriting was almost illegible. So for this book, I actually created a font based off of the most neat possible version I could manage of my own handwriting. So what you'll see in the comic pages, which you can read at sablecomic.com, that is my handwriting. It's just a very careful, neat version of it that was converted into a font. And I do all that lettering, and I draw the speech bubbles in Clip Studio Paint, which is a great program for making comics. So you can see how fast this environment's coming together. It's just sort of, lining up all the line work. Echoing shapes, following patterns, trying to keep to the same logic. And then, like I said, once I have all the line work in place, I'll go back and I'll add in all the hatching and texture and shadows and things. This is just to get the overall gist of it down. A little detailing to this frame, just a little bit of variation. I really like drawing this way, especially once I get to the sort of hatch mark part of it where I'm just adding volume and texture. It's very easy just to kind of turn my brain off, zone out, and just make marks on paper. It feels very natural, very calming. There's a lot of arches in the House of Wits End, on the risers and in the doorways. The sort of design ethos I had when I was designing the haunted house was it is situated on the edge of a wood that in the script I describe as like slowly eating the house. So the trees are kind of growing up and around the outside of the house, and so I wanted the architecture of the inside to kind of echo and imitate that, like the arches of the trees outside, that sort of thing. And so like you get these arch things on the risers, and they're meant to sort of suggest and echo like the tree trunks and then the branches spreading out above. All right, so that's oh. I think I lost you guys. Oh, there we go. I think I lost you guys for a second. Watching art streams makes me calm somehow. I'm so glad. I think they're also calming to watch, which is kind of why I wanted to start doing one regularly. I just think they're a nice, like, chill, hangout vibe, you know? Alright, I'm going to stick with the fountain pen for at least these two panels, and then I'll switch to the G-nib dip pen for the bigger close-up character stuff. With a lot of these details, you can see with this pencil drawing that there's not much to it. I'm confident enough in my design and the sort of overall feel and aesthetic of the environment in the book that I feel fairly comfortable just improvising, you know, little details like this. Just because I kind of know how this goes, and I know what the proportions need to be and how it needs to look. And that kind of confidence just comes with drawing it over and over and over again. I've drawn these little architectural details, you know, even though this is still fairly early on in the story, you know, dozens of times at this point. There. So I'm not going to go deep into this because this is all going to get filled in with black. This is going to be like very deep, heavy shadow. We'll probably get to that part on the stream. Alright, just a few more little lines here. The perspective on this hallway is not quite as good as it should be, but like I said, it's mostly going to be heavy, like inked shadows, so I can cover up a lot of these little goofs. Some panels you can't really do that on, but this one is fine. I'm actually going to put that up a little higher. Alright. And then this one is a close-up of one of these paintings. So this particular little panel I'm working on right now is a sort of very loose detail picture of Uncle Martin, who is Teddy. This is Teddy, the protagonist. This is his mysterious adventure writer uncle, who is missing at this point in the story. So his presence is kind of felt through little snippets of his books and these little pictures he has around the house. Let's see, I can bring you guys a little closer. You can see this is another very tiny drawing. It's a little less detailed than the drawing of Teddy up here, so I don't need the magnifying glass for this one, but maybe I should be using it, but I'm not going to. I always almost forget the tails. I don't draw... I like to draw a lot of these like anthropomorphic animal characters just in my sketchbook and for fun, but I haven't drawn them professionally as much before this project. And I almost always forget the tails. Alright, and then behind Uncle Martin there's this old statue. Hello, hello. Alright, I want to start adding little weathering details to the statue, but I need to get the overall details in first. Alright, and then we'll draw some grass and weeds that are growing up around it. So this character of Uncle Martin, his whole deal is that he is an adventure writer. So it's sort of vaguely based off of this style of writing that existed in the early 1900s, mostly, where writers would go out on these trips and they would write, serialized versions of their adventures. And a lot of them were sort of purported to be like, this is an actual true thing of the time I went to deepest India, or, to China or Japan or whatever. But a lot of them, like, if you read them, just couldn't possibly be accurate. It was a lot of like very like Indiana Jones, like buried treasure, secret cults, that kind of thing. And so Uncle Martin is one of those writers. And so his house is filled with these artifacts from his journeys and pictures of some of the locations of, the place where his books are based on. Adding these little like weathering marks here. That looks pretty good. More grass. Alright, and then we'll fill this in with some shrubbery just to really drive home the idea that this picture is like a ruins out in the forest. That's mostly where Martin likes to hang out. Old ruins, abandoned temples, that sort of thing. Very Indiana Jones. Let's see, and then I'm going to do like little line hatching marks here just to kind of really suggest that this is like a picture. It's like an etching. Here, let me bring it up a bit so you guys can see what I'm doing. But this is the kind of drawing I like, where I have the sort of roughed-in sketch of what needs to be there, like what visual information needs to be conveyed to the reader for the story to visually make sense. And then once that's in there, I kind of like just to do this, just to make marks, add little details. Like I said, just kind of turn my brain off and just draw. Alright, I'm going to draw the edge of the picture frame here. Actually, I need the edge of the picture frame to be a little bit thicker than that line was. So now we're going to switch to the dip pen. So I'm switching to this G-nib dip pen. I've got this lovely sort of thicker pen handle that's like nice and ergonomic, so I'm not tempted to grip it too hard. Actually mix up my ink a little bit. Where's my little mixing stick? There it is. So I'll put it on stream here in a second once I stir this ink up, but I have an old vintage inkwell that I put all of my ink into. When I'm using the dip pen, I use an FW acrylic artist's ink. Like the fountain pen ink, it dries once it's waterproof. It's waterproof once it's dried, sorry. So I can paint over it. So this is what the inkwell looks like. It's like spill proof, it's like weighted glass, and then it's just like you open up a little flask and the ink's in there. All right. So the advantage that this pen has over the dip pen is the nib has a lot more flex to it, so I can get a much bigger line width and variety. The reason I use the fountain pen is because the fountain pen offers a bit more control, and because I don't have to re-dip it every few lines, it can be a little bit faster. So I like to have the different pens on hand just so I can switch between them as the image demands. Alright. I'm going to re-angle this one in post. It's a little more... I wanted to have it crooked just to sort of really point out the fact that it was a picture hanging on a wall, but it's a little too much. So once this gets scanned in for the final, I'll kind of straighten it out a little bit. Tass19921 asks, do you have a favorite character from Deephaven that you like to draw the most? Thank you so much for your question. That's such a good question. For those who are new and unfamiliar with my work, Deephaven is an illustrated gothic horror novel that I wrote. It's one of 2 books so far, both of which are in bookstores now. It's like a nice gothic mystery. My favorite character to draw is definitely Nev. I try... Usually the protagonist of whatever book I'm working on is whichever one I have the most fun drawing, just because I'll be drawing them the most. Nev, I love that like big, long, blocky coat that they wear. I like their sharp nose. There's just a lot of like... They're sort of just made up of fun shapes to draw. But they're all fun, you know. Danny's very fun. Like he's got these sort of bigger, bulkier shapes. He sort of exists in a nice visual contrast to Nev. And even though I don't do a lot of drawings of her, one of my favorite characters to write from those books is Patience Sleepwell, who is a prefect at the school. She's sort of a minor antagonist of the series. And she's one of my favorite people to write. Her dialogue is just so fun. When I first was outlining the novel, she was a fairly minor character. She was just going to be another obstacle that Nev and Danny had to get around, you know, in the course of solving whatever supernatural mystery they were working on. But I had kind of one of those rare moments that you hear authors talk about sometimes where the characters started to make demands on me, and Patience just refused to be a background character. And so with every draft, she would just sort of crop up in more and more scenes and exert more and more of an influence over the narrative. So she's one of my favorite characters, just because she was such a surprise, you know? So you can see with these lines, I'm not doing a whole lot of like sketching, like a little light like you know. I'm trying to be very confident about my ink marks, and it's okay to do those slow, you know. In fact, I think you should. Just trying to be very deliberate, you know. Oh, wow. Artistic Nomad is describing the story that they're working on. They're a supernatural detective novel. It sounds great. I love that kind of stuff. I love the like occult detective trope. You know, that was the big basis for the Deephaven books. I think it's just such a fun structure for a story. Luca asks, what mythological creature do you consider to be the scariest from your books? That's a very good question. It hasn't popped up in the webcomic yet, but the ghost in Sable in this story, I think, is pretty genuinely frightening. And I hope readers will agree. Other than that, I think the scariest one, to me at least, is the Beast, which is the sort of central monster from Deep Haven. At least the first novel. And I won't spoil why for those who haven't read it, who would be interested in something like that. But there was something very psychologically frightening to me about the Beast, which is why I wrote it as like the main monsters, because the idea of it and how it exists and why it exists, I thought was quite scary. Maybe readers won't find it as scary, but it's just, you sort of write what personally frightens you. So you can see how much thicker the lines are and the variation of lines from this one pen as opposed to like, this drawing, which is a lot more rigid. I don't know, I really like monsters. I think almost every book I've ever done has like, monsters and creatures and stuff in it. It's just stuff I loved as a kid and I love it as an adult, and I feel very lucky that I have a career where I get to kind of play with stuff like that. Teddy's talking on the phone in this scene, so that's what this is. Old-fashioned phone receiver. Alright, I try to make the line a little more lively, especially for things like clothes, where it's just this sort of organic folds of the fabric, so I'll go a little faster with that kind of stuff. It's also like not as necessary to be completely accurate with stuff like that as it is like face and hands, because clothing shifts constantly, I love drawing this like wavy knit pattern on Teddy's sweater. For the vast majority of the book, we'll mostly see this sweater. The jacket he's wearing doesn't show up again after this page, actually. This is the last page where he wears it. And then it's just the sweater and his trousers. It's much more simple, and I'm excited to just draw this little, like... This is like a good, like, zone out, like, doodle in your notebook pattern, I think. She's repeating waves. And again, I'm not super concerned about having them be very like tight and mathematically accurate. I kind of like that it sags and pulls in different spots. Alright. Pull down here. This is Graham. He's the other main character of the story. Whenever I'm designing a character, I always try to focus overall on the sort of basic shapes that make them up. So Graham has this very triangular head, right? Teddy's is also triangular, but it's a little more rounded at the top. So he kind of looks younger and a little more, innocent. Graham looks kind of sharp and threatening, and, I wanted to have Teddy's shapes be like very soft and kind of slouchy. He's this sort of disaffected teenager, and then Graham's are these sort of big, intimidating, blocky shapes. These sort of huge shoulders, big shapes in his robe and on to his face and everything. Just trying to communicate in the shape language something about the character themselves. He's got this big scar over one eye. Sorry if I go quiet for a bit. Like I said, I find this way of working very calming and meditative. So it's very easy for me just to kind of zone out and forget that you guys are here. But I appreciate that you're here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and for all your great questions. Alright. So this page is inking fairly quickly, which is nice. Once I'm done with drawing Graham here, I'll move on to doing the big, blocked in ink shadows, and then I can kind of do all the hatch work. Says my daughter wants to dress up as Nev for Halloween and wants to know if you have any tips for cosplaying as Nev costume-wise. Oh, what a great question! I'm so flattered. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing is a nice, long, dramatic overcoat with plenty of pockets. I think that's the key to cosplaying Nev, especially if you fill those pockets with weird little trinkets. A lot of the design of Nev was just me dreaming up what my ideal jacket would be. But Nev is a pretty easy costume, I think. Part of that was, again, something I knew would be not too terribly difficult for me to draw over and over again in the illustrations. But it was just a look I liked. I like that sort of classic detective overcoat, enough pockets and enough volume to hide secrets in. Alright. So there's Graham. Let's do big overall ink brush. So let me wash off this pen. This is going to be upside down because the camera's flipped, but there's my dog. Kitsu, what are you doing? Let's see, can I rotate this so you can see properly? There he is. There, you guys can keep an eye on him while I wait for this ink to dry. This is how it works. I'm usually at my desk working, and he's either curled up under my chair or on this chair. There's a window that he's staring at. He's kind of just watching the neighborhood right now. He is cute. This is Kitsune, or Kitsu for short. He's my little workshop assistant. This is what he does. He just watches and takes naps. Occasionally offers comments on the work. Pretty simple. You just standing there? He doesn't know. Alright, let's see. Where's my ink brush? While I'm waiting for this. Not that one. Where is it? This one. No, maybe this one. Wondering how long he's going to stay there. What you think, bud? What's going on out there? Should this just be the stream? Should we just watch the dog instead? What you doing, buddy? Oh, there he goes. There you are. A little bit of Kitsune. Oh, sorry for the rotating. That was a nice little break while we waited for ink to dry. Maybe if I've talked before about if I get enough Patreon subscribers, maybe I'll do a little Kitsu cam. You can have a little window like the one where you can see me, maybe just right below. Just put a little camera down next to his bed where he hangs out. So I've been doing these like big inky block shadows for a lot of this. It's going to get blended into some like ink hatch marks. So there's a little bit of like a gradient, but you know, it is a haunted house story, and so even if there's nothing directly spooky happening, I like sort of covering a lot of the house in these big, sort of impenetrably dark, shadowy corners. Over here, dark too. So the thing I'm using to do these big spot blacks is when I'm doing the watercolor for my comics, I use these watercolor and calligraphy brushes, which are great. They can hold a lot of water and they do a lot of like really nice fine detail, but the tips of them wear out over time. And so they kind of lose their ability to really efficiently do the kind of detail work that I need. But instead of throwing them out, I just turn them into ink brushes. So this brush is pretty stiff. It doesn't really have the flexibility of like a good brush, but it's perfect for this kind of thing. And then this page here, this little panel, this is where it's almost all going to be heavy spot blacks. I'm kind of leaving this like dry brush feathered edge here, just so I can go back in with the fountain pen or the G-nib afterwards and do all the little like hatching to blend it, so it feels like a natural sort of like skittery shadow, you know? I've talked before on the streams about how my sort of personal ethos when it comes to comics and illustration is that obviously you want to make a beautiful image, you want to do good work, you want to make something that's interesting to look at, but the overall objective, you know, the end-all be-all rule is readability. It should be immediately clear to the reader what they're looking at. They should be able to, you know, read the image at a glance. Beyond that, like once that sort of condition's been fulfilled, I'm very interested in texture, and so I like to use Inkwork to put in a lot of like visual static, basically, just to give the image a really nice tactile feel. Alright. That's looking nice. Alright, and the last spot black for this page is just over Graham's shoulder here. While I'm filling this in, once again, if you're just joining the stream, I saw we had a few people come in. Hello, my name is Ethan Aldridge. I'm an author and illustrator, and I'm drawing pages from my hand-drawn and hand-painted webcomic titled Sable, A Ghost Story, which you can start reading for free now on sablecomic.com. We just started posting Chapter 1 publicly last week, and then folks on Patreon are already on to Chapter 2. So if ghost stories and talking animals and cool outfits are your thing, this is the comic for you. OneDrop says, watching you ink is high-key so satisfying. Thank you so much. I have to say, it's pretty satisfying to do, too. There is, like, a part of the brain that really just feels good, you know, filling in these spaces. It's just making marks on paper, you know? It's, like, so... I feel like it's, like, so core to us as people. I feel like that's what we mostly do as kids, right? When we get into drawing, it's just like the pleasure of just making marks, and that's what inking feels like to me. Alright, there's the spot blacks done. So those go by pretty fast. And then from here, I'm going to use the G-nib to do hatch marks for shading, stuff like that. But I give that a minute to dry though. Let's see if we can do another Kitsu break. So this is where he is now. Oh, I don't know if my camera will reach this far. You see him? This is under my desk chair. There's his little haunch right there. Oh. There he is. Silly little snorf. Erica Anderson. Hi, Erica. Were there ever any cartoons that you were inspired by either as a kid or now that has inspired you, your art and stories? We were watching Scooby-Doo today. Scooby-Doo is a big one. I especially love the old Scooby-Doo ones, those beautiful background paintings. Yes, love Scooby-Doo. Lots of cartoons. I'm very inspired by animation. I'm trying to think if there's any cartoons in particular that influenced Sable. Obviously, Over the Garden Wall is a beautiful animated series. It's a newer one. You know, basically anyone I know who's involved in illustration or animation just went nuts for that one. I was talking earlier about seeing animated things that don't necessarily influence style, but just sort of motivate you to work on your own stuff just because the thing itself is so beautiful and so of the creator's work. And I've recently been obsessed with a French children's animated film that came out a year or two ago called Sirocco and the Kingdom of Winds. A beautiful, like strange, psychedelic French children's film. Really, really gorgeous. I don't really draw anything like the style, but I just came home from the theater just so excited to sit down and draw afterwards. I love stuff like that. I'm trying to think what else. what other animated things have I've been going back and the official Moomin channel has been uploading the old like Moomin anime. If you guys know the Moomin Trolls, they're like Finnish comic and picture book series that got adapted into an anime in the 90s, and the sort of official franchise channel's been uploading them for free on YouTube, and so those have been on in the background a lot for me lately. What else? What other cartoons? There's so many. I love animation. I love stop motion films. You know, Tim Burton, Fantastic Mr. Fox with Wes Anderson. That was a big one. There's a lot. There's too many. So I'm just taking a kneaded eraser, and the spots where the ink is dry, I'm just erasing the pencil drawing. This is a soft kneaded eraser, so it won't mess with the ink. It's just soft enough to pick up the pencil. So this kind of cleans it up. Yeah, Gravity Falls. That was another one where I feel like I had sort of established my style and sensibilities before Gravity Falls came out. But it was another one of those where I watched it and it just made me so excited to sit down and write and draw, just because it was so clear that the people making it were having a good time. And that sort of joy of creation, I think, is really infectious. I love stuff like that. I'm being real careful here, because some of these big spot blacks are not dry yet. This acrylic ink dries pretty fast, but not that fast. Alright, that's enough to get started with. Alright, let's switch back to the G-nib for this one. I'm gonna reference some scans on previous pages here to see how I did this. Slide it down so you guys can see what I'm doing. That's still in focus. Is that still in focus for everyone? It looks good. So this is my favorite part of drawing, right? Of inking right here, is once all the structural stuff is done, the details are fixed. That's all the hard part. This is the easy part. This is what I was talking about earlier, just making marks on paper. With this kind of hatchwork, it kind of goes out of the Mike Mignola Hellboy influence, and you start to see a bit of like my Edward Gorey influence, you know? Edward Gorey was a big inspiration to me as a teenager, and also now. I just love that like dense ink work he does. And you can see again, I'm not too concerned about like making these marks very even. It's kind of creating this sort of like organic layered wave, you know? It's very like stylized shadows. And I like that. I think it gives an image an interesting texture. So even though your brain knows it's just like shadows and gradient, it's at least something kind of pleasing to look at. I've talked about it before on past live streams, but speaking of the movie Fantastic Mr. Fox, a thing I think about all the time is I was watching sort of the little making of documentary, and the animators mentioned that So for people who aren't familiar with how stop motion works, is you have the puppets and then you take a single picture and then you move them a fraction of an inch, take a picture again, do that again and again and again, and then string all those images together, and that's what gives the illusion of movement and animation. And in between shots, the animators would sometimes run their hands over the puppet just to make the fur ruffle. And it wasn't controlled, it wasn't like very precise, it was just something to make the fur kind of bristle and ripple organically on camera. And I like that sort of intentional flaw that they're building in. You know, it's something that would be considered a mistake to have things move around on you like that, but it's what makes the puppets feel very lively. See, that's what I'm talking about. It's so easy to zone out. It's such like a restful way to draw. Highly recommend just getting a nice smooth pen, just making a bunch of little lines. Let's do some hatching over here in this hallway. Sorry. I'm trying to scoot you guys around so you can see. So you can see how I'm blending these like thick hatch marks with the inked brushwork that I did earlier. Brush is rolling away on me here. All right. Erica asks, at what stage does a page or a comic or maybe just a character start to come alive for you that gets you excited to drive the rest of the project? That's a good question. It's hard to say exactly. I feel like it's different for every project, every character, every page. There is a moment when things start to kind of click into place. I think the best a thing that will happen to me sometimes, especially when I'm working on a longer project like this, is when I'm in the middle of like writing it and doing concept designs, and I'm sketching the characters, and I'm drafting the story, and I'm just sort of spending all of my time in the story. There's this thing that will happen sometimes where I know it's going well, where I will start to have dreams in which the characters are talking to each other. And it's never like scenes from the book or like talking about anything interesting. You know, it's just like chit-chatting about like schoolwork or, you know, errands they have to run that day or something. But they're sort of talking to each other in the voice of the character themselves, not just like me. And that's when it feels like it sort of clicked, like they've sort of started to become, real believable characters. So that doesn't happen all the time, but when it does happen, it's a good feeling. Just because it means they're kind of becoming a bit more organic and just themselves in my head. But when I'm working on developing a project, I spend a lot of time, especially during the writing phase, just drawing the characters in my sketchbooks again and again and again. Partially just to practice, because I'll have to be drawing them, hundreds of thousands of times during the course of a project. But it's also a way for me to sort of get introduced to the character. By drawing them, I kind of learn, how they hold themselves, how they move, their facial expressions, how they react to certain things. So you can see already just from these little hash marks how much depth and texture this is taking on. Doesn't that look so much more interesting to look at? Again, I don't want to go too nuts because this page is going to have a lot of dialogue on it, but I like to have a lot of this texture for the eye to rest on. A lot of these lines are meant not only just to suggest shadows, but also just the natural scuff and wear that happens in old houses. Another version of your question, Erica, is that I get asked sometimes is, how do I know a story idea is good enough for me to work on it as a full book, as opposed to just an idea in my notebook that's never going to go anywhere. And I never know when I write the idea down which one it's going to be. So with Sable, the original notes were just that I liked stories like The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Graham. The sort of classic, cozy, talking animal stories. And I kind of wanted to do something like that. And it occurred to me that, I also love old, Gothic ghost stories and haunted house stories. And I don't think I had ever seen the two combined ever. And so I thought that might be an interesting texture for a story. And so that was it. That was just some notes and a couple sketches. And I have a lot of stuff like that never goes anywhere. It just kind of stays in my sketchbook. But I can always tell when I start to return to an idea again and again and again, that something about it just really captures my imagination. And the process of developing an actual book out of it is mostly the process of me trying to figure out what about the idea interests me so much. It really is especially the early days of writing and designing, it's really just me telling the story to myself because I'm interested in what happens and I want to know. Alright, I think that top panel's pretty much done. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to save this one for a bit because that's still drying, so I'm going to move on to these ones. Yeah, I mean, I have more ideas in my sketchbook, already than I'm ever going to be able to get to in my lifetime. And, quite a few of them are, probably just not really worth turning into a full novel. Some of them are best as just a sketch or an image or a note. Some of them are maybe a short story. I would really like to do more short story writing. I just picked up a book today, actually, about the art of short story writing, called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by George Saunders, which I'm excited to get into. But some stuff is a shorter project like that. But yeah, it's mostly just trying to really be in tune with your own interests. Working on a book is such a long process. Usually development for a story takes me anywhere between 1 and 3 or 4 years. I think I first started making notes on Sable 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And it's just kind of been slowly simmering in my sketchbooks in the background while I work on other stuff. And then actual art production, like what you're seeing here, that always takes anywhere from 10 months to a year for me, sometimes longer for other artists. And then it's another year before, at least, so this is a webcomic, so people are reading this now, which is very nice, because I can kind of get feedback and reactions as I'm working on it. But if I'm doing like traditional publishing, like my usual graphic novels or like the Deep Haven books, you know, it's a full year usually after I finish working on it before it actually hits shelves, just because of book production timelines and stuff like that. So you really need to be sure that whatever you're writing about is something you're interested in. That's why you hear a lot of published authors, especially ones who have been doing it for a while. They will all tell you that, you know, don't bother chasing trends in publishing, like just because you see a certain genre or a kind of story or character is popular. Don't bother working in that way unless it really does genuinely interest you, because publishing and the act of bookmaking is so slow that the trends will have long since changed by the time your prospective book comes out. So it's best just to work on stuff that you're really interested in. And I think the best way to do that is just to like sit with an idea for a while, you know, before you tell anyone about it, before you declare that this is going to be your magnum opus. You know, have an idea, feel like it's a good idea, and then just kind of tinker with it, you know, in your notebook or on your laptop or whatever, however you like to work, and see if it holds your interests over time. And if you keep coming back to it and you keep compulsively thinking about it and tinkering with it, then that's probably a story worth pursuing. All right. We're going to do a little shading on Graham here, and then that'll be, we'll call that the end of the stream, because then this page will be pretty much inked. Artistic Nomad says, what type of pen are you using? I may be a digital artist, but it looks satisfying. Thank you. This is a dip pen. I'm dipping it in just a little inkwell just off camera here. Specifically, I'm using a G-nib dip pen. A G-nib is a very flexible type of nib that allows for very smooth drawing with a lot of variation in the line width. So it makes for very expressive drawings. And it is very satisfying. I think it's a very satisfying tool to draw with. It's the pen nib that is been popularized and is mostly used by Japanese manga artists. I actually get my nibs from an import Japanese stationery store, though you can just get them online. And yeah, I think they're very satisfying to draw with. I believe they also make, you can find pretty good digital imitations of G-nibs. There's a lot of artists who really like the texture, and they're the ones who are more technologically savvy than I am have developed some very, very good G-nib digital brushes. But me personally, I just kind of like the real thing. I like, I don't know if you can hear it on this mic, because I have this rigged up to, it's a G as in good. G as in good nib. Yeah, I don't know if you can hear it on this mic, because this mic is mostly the kind that just sort of picks up my voice, but it makes a very pleasant, kind of soft scratching noise on the paper. I really like that. You kind of miss out on that with digital stuff. I occasionally do a little bit of digital work. I have an iPad and Procreate that I use, especially if I'm working with a client, like if I'm illustrating a book cover for another author. A lot of times I'll do the rough sketch digitally because there's usually a lot of like notes and feedback and things, and so I can very easily shift colors or proportions or composition. And then I'll do this kind of work, traditional pen and ink and watercolor for the final cover. But I've been using the iPad a little bit lately for sketches for client work. But I'm definitely a pen and ink guy. I like keeping my work off of screens as much as I possibly can. You know, I'm as addicted to my phone as anyone is, and so the less time I can spend on screens, the better. So you can see the further I get away from the big blocked inky shadows, the less dense I'm making the hatchwork, just to suggest that there's like a light coming from this side. Yeah, every time you see my sort of ink hand go off screen here, it's because the little reservoir of ink in the nib has run out, and I need to go dip it in the inkwell again to recharge it. That's the reason that people don't really use dip pens anymore, is because you kind of and so something like a fountain pen or a ballpoint pen is just much more efficient. But in terms of drawing, I think a dip pen just has such a lovely, distinctive, kind of scratchy look. I think it just looks very hand-drawn in a way that sometimes more technical pens you don't always get. You know, in this digital age of AI art and whatever, I think it's more important than ever to have it be really clear when something is hand-drawn if you can. All right, that's looking pretty good. That's quite a bit of work done. I think we'll call the stream there for today. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. This was such a pleasure to hang out and chat with you all. Thank you all so much for your good questions. If you would like to start reading Sable for free, you can do so on sablecomic.com. There's the link under this video. I'll be posting 2 pages a week throughout the whole story. And if you would like an extra page per week and would like to read a full chapter and change ahead, we are well into chapter 2 over on the Patreon, which you can also find the link below. But in the meantime, I am planning to be back next Sunday with another live stream. Maybe we'll do a watercolor painting one so you guys can see the coloring technique. But in the meantime, thank you all so much, and I will see you next week. Bye.